at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time.
Good afternoon and a warm welcome to you all. Thanks indeed for being here. Just a reminder that we record and it is on air. We're open, so for those that are listening, wherever you may be, welcome as well to our meeting. And a reminder for those in the room here with mobile phones, if you could have them switched off, as it can interfere with the recording. So it'd be great if they could be switched off. Thank you, and please be seated. We have no apologies for today's meeting. So declaration of interest? Any declaration of interest from any of the councillors? No. Confirmation of minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the 25th of July? Move Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Dawkins. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. There are no deputations, no petitions. We have a community report though, and it's a pleasure to welcome Melissa Morrison, who's from Plastic Free Launceston. No, it's Trish. What's that? I was only saying it's got Melissa in here, but it's Trish that's here. I can see that. Oh, that's all right. Welcome, Trish.
Thank you very much, councillors, and thank you for the invitation to give you just a very brief rundown and report on what Plastic Free Launceston has been doing, because we've had a really busy year. We started the year off with inviting Anthony Hill from Plastic Pollution Solutions. He travels around Australia delivering wonderful programs to schools and communities. So he was able to come to Launceston and work with a number of schools here, and that was wonderful. Following that, we are now an AusMap hub for Northern Tasmania. That means that Plastic Free Launceston administers the citizen science activity, which ultimately trains up people to go out to our beaches and waterways and to survey for microplastics. It will eventually go to back to New South Wales, to the scientists there, where they're constructing a Australia-wide map of the distribution of microplastics. So it's wonderful to be part of that project. Plastic Free July has been a huge event. It's getting bigger every year. The very first year that we were involved in it at Harvest Market, somebody walked past our table and said, "This will never take off." Well, it has taken off. It's taken off globally. I've been in contact with Plastic Free Hong Kong, Plastic Free London, and there's another Plastic Free Launceston in the UK as well. So during Plastic Free July, we're at Harvest Market every week. We've got the mug library going to reduce the amount of coffee cups being disposed of. Each week we had a different theme to still work on the whole idea of this community education, because that's what we're about. Delivering information that can make our community understand why plastic pollution is such a problem, and really practical ways to respond to it as well. ABC Radio was very supportive. You might have heard some of the children from West Launceston Primary School, Perth and St Anthony's, Riverside, giving their tips in the morning. Oliver, one of our highlights of the tips was young Oliver saying, "All you blokes out in your utes, don't forget your keep cup." So they were really good bits of practical advice that those young children gave. City Park Radio also supported us by putting us on every Wednesday to give some practical tips as well. We had displays in the Launceston Library on 2 occasions. At the end of Plastic Free July, we then bounced straight into the launch of Catching in the Catchment. So this is a project with Tamar NRM, NRM North and the 3 councils along the Tamar, where in November we're aiming for a community clean-up that involves all the communities along the Tamar at the one time in various places on the one day to be involved in this large clean-up. And from that we'll be collecting data to see where is this waste coming from, particularly plastic pollution, and how we can prevent it getting into our beautiful waterway. To finish up, a couple of observations. The conversations are definitely changing. When we first started, it was hard to get a conversation about plastic pollution. Now, most of the people coming to us are telling us about plastic pollution. So we've definitely noticed that change, and that's certainly been from the support we've been given, particularly by council as well. At the Curious Climate event a few nights ago, it was really interesting to hear that with climate change, the best thing we can do is make our environments, our varying ecosystems more resilient. And that means protecting them, protecting what we've got, and keeping pollution out of those areas. So Plastic Free Launceston feels that our banner is getting broader as well. So it's been a great year so far. Again, thank you very much for the support of the council, and we look forward to it in the future.
Thanks very much, Trish. Appreciate that report, and thank you for the work you do in our community. It is appreciated, so thank you very much. So it's now time for public question time. Questions from the public can be asked at this time.
Mr Mayor, councillors, Mr Stratton, I have a number of questions and I do understand if some may not be able to actually be answered today, and I accept that they may need to perhaps be taken as questions on notice and answers.
Yeah, it's normally limited to 3 per person, so we'll see how you go.
Right.
Thank you.
They relate to 14 St George's Square and the historic brick wall. The owner of the property has publicly written in response to comments in Wednesday's Examiner article that she contacted the council when purchasing the property to ensure that she could rebuild the wall. She states that she would never have bought the property if she had to live with the leaning fence. Given that this would indicate council knew of her intentions to demolish and rebuild the wall, I would like to ask if this information was passed to councillors sitting on the Heritage Advisory Committee. Was this known to the Director of Planning and also the Senior Manager of Planning, both of whom sit on the Heritage Advisory Committee together with Councillor Mackenzie as Chair and Councillor Walker? And if it was not passed on, why not?
Yeah, we'll take that one on notice, definitely.
Yes,
thank you.
I understand that. Thank
Good.
you, Mr Mayor. I also understand the owner of the property received an email from council dating from November the 17th, or around that date, in 2017, concerning her wish to demolish the wall, and which I understand gave her permission to do so. Were the council's heritage planner and the members of the Heritage Advisory Committee given this information as part of any briefing or background information on 14 St George's Square and its historic 1870s brick wall? And will this matter be further investigated by council, and if so, what actions can council take?
Yeah, General Manager's happy to answer that one.
Thanks, Mayor. So look, I can't answer the specifics in respect of the email, and I'll investigate that. As to the requirement, so technically, as I understand it, there is a permit would be required under the planning scheme to demolish the wall, extant of the circumstances which we're investigating at the moment, which is, was there a safety issue that needed to be resolved, and they're the things that we're currently investigating. But in terms of the council giving approval for the wall to be demolished without permit, then I'll substantiate it. But as I understand it, the permit, there would be a permit required for that to have happened. So I will come back to you on the specifics.
Right. My third question was, given that the 1870s historic wall at 14 to 16 St George's Square was recommended for protection unanimously by the Council's Heritage Advisory Committee, which includes, of course, the 2 councillors mentioned before and the Planning Director and its senior management, and which is on the agenda for this meeting, why was no interim protection able to be applied to the wall until a decision was made by this council in respect to that agenda item? Thank you. That is my 3 questions.
Yeah, we'll take that on notice too. Thank you very much. So, no worries. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Jim Dickinson, West Tamar Road. I have 3 questions today, and that will be my last because I'm going to retire from being involved in city matters. I just, in case you're wondering where I've disappeared to, I'm formally retiring. So question one is regarding the building heights and massing study. Before that was started, in the city centre you could build acceptable solution of 14.5 metres, but a developer could ask to build above that to an unlimited height, and normally, well, approval would not be given. So after spending a considerable amount of money on a consultant's fee and a year of study, the condition now is that you can still build to 14.5 metres, and you can still build up to 24 metres or above 24 metres up to an unrestricted height, which is exactly the same as it was. So the question is, what has been achieved?
I think a lot's been achieved. We've had a very good discussion with our community, number one, and we've got a lot of feedback on that from the community. We've also had a lot of side on different parts of our city to where people do have different heights and allowable for different heights, but I don't know if the General Manager wants to go further on that as well.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So the new provisions around the performance criteria will include, once they are actually developed and adopted, design guidelines and I guess an increased range of matters that need to be addressed by proponents moving into the or proposing developments into the future, and that wasn't and isn't currently part of the planning scheme. So there will be a very robust framework for determining higher buildings once that performance criteria is in place in due course.
Yeah, the point still is, previously you could build to whatever height you wanted to, and now you can
Anyway, we're not into debate here, it's just question time. It's question time, as you're aware, so any other questions?
Well, I'm just saying that answer was not really specific. The question is, what has been achieved?
I think a lot's been achieved, and once we get the new report, you'll see that.
So
We've still got to go through the process.
You still haven't said what has been achieved.
Anyway.
Regarding the Information Traffic Master Plan, that project's been going on for over a year, and during that time I contributed to community input as was invited by the council, and I provided ideas and questions to that project, and while the questions were always politely answered, were acknowledged, they were not answered. And in October last year, a report was made to Council outlining the way forward and recommending acceptance of that report. But the Alderman at the time did not accept that report and referred it back to have more consideration and investigation. So that was last October, 9 months ago. The new report still hasn't come before Council, but the Department of State Growth had a meeting 2 weeks ago in which they presented the solution, and it's going to be put out to tender next month or very shortly. So the point is that they presented a solution as a fait accompli to go to tender basically straight away.
I don't think that's correct. I wasn't at that meeting, I must admit, but we weren't aware of that meeting until the day or so before. That's why not many of us could go. I'm not sure. I think Councillor Spencer went. But
I was there. What I'm saying is basically correct.
But it's not fait accompli because we still have to go through a process for some of our decisions that we need to make as well.
Well, that just complicates my question, really. It seems to be not proceeding in a logical, formal, consistent way.
Yeah, I can't understand why State Growth did it the way they did it, but that's another matter for us to follow, which we have followed through with them.
Okay. You've sort of answered the question. I just want to know what is going on.
Well, I've told you that we only did negotiate. Do you want to follow up, General Manager?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So what's going on is clearly a complex matter to resolve. Council, when it was presented last year, obviously raised concerns and wanted matters investigated. In investigating those matters, obviously there are broader matters that you need to consider in terms of the implication of changes in that area on other parts of the network. And so we've been working with the state growth around a broader transport vision document that does then seek to try and address some of the issues the council are raising, and it is coming back to council for workshopping, I think, in the next 22nd of August to touch base with those. In terms of the state growth, obviously we have got a bit of alignment in terms of our processes, and we've had, as the Mayor has indicated, some conversations post that process, and we will certainly bring ourselves back into alignment in terms of that particular project, as I say, with this workshop being our next action.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And question 3 relates to the old roof that used to be in the mall. You used to call it Napoleon's hat. A lot of people don't think it should have been removed. It was a really well-designed structure. But anyway, we were led to believe that it would be relocated in the new Riverbend Park, and that's now nearly completed. So the question is, when and where will the old roof be re-erected?
Director Matt Scurvy. Well, not Director, Acting.
Yes, so the structure's been salvaged from the mall for potential reuse. There were some initial thoughts around potential applications at Riverbend Park, which are still being considered. We're also looking more broadly at some other potential reuse applications for that structure, and we've got some other locations where it might be a suitable fit in terms of the aesthetics and the purpose of that structure. So it's still actively being considered by council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hello, look, I'm Jenny Davidson. Look, I have 2 questions, please, and they're in relation to the development at 14 to 16 St George's Square again. Just building on what Glenda said, I was concerned that I read in the public domain that the developer involved had written publicly and been quoted in the press as saying that the wall was actually deemed dangerous prior to being removed, taken down today. And my question is, had the council received any expert engineering report that the fence was a danger? Because obviously that is a significant, if it wasn't dangerous, I mean, any of us could look at something and, make that. So that was one question. And the second one, I'm just deeply concerned about the adjoining property, Torkington, that have the 2 massive sakura trees. Now, look, seeing what happened on Tuesday, can the council put in place any sort of protection that there will be no further repairs or excavation or so forth in the area of those trees? Because obviously the root system extends into 1416 St George's Square, and the arborist from Torkington says they'd be in a lot of danger if there was just excavation. Because I was present when the wall was being excavated, was being demolished by one of those diggers with it was going all around particularly a mulberry tree in the number 14 property. And obviously the man was a workman, and he would have no idea of the root system of that particular tree. Concerning the sakai's, if the same thing happened around the roots of the sakai's, obviously the arborist it's going to be their demise, and then whose responsibility will that be? So the question is, can council put in place something that a proper management of the tree safety before any further works occur on that site, please?
Thank you. General Manager?
We'll just have to investigate that, Mayor.
Yeah, we'll take it on notice, but we'll look at that, and I'm sure there are steps that we can take. But
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? So now we...
Hang on, there's one more.
Oh, sorry.
Mark Waldron. Just a question similar to the previous speaker regarding what measures council put in place to ensure that heritage or built environment or the trees, the vegetation are protected in future. The original subdivision DA had provisions regarding these protections, but they seem to have been ignored from what I can see. And also in the DA for the demolition, there seem to be some rather vague commitments to do something in the future. I mean, a sequoia tree could live another 1,000 years. You're also looking at a tree that would have a root system that could spread 8 to 9 metres, so they're quite near the fence line, and they'll extend into the building envelope for the new structure. Just from a practical point of view, I need to know what compliance arrangements council would have and how they would be enforced. I mean, the original subdivision covered the brick fence at the front, and half of that is gone now.
We'll take that on notice as well.
Yeah,
and
so
get back
it's
to you.
really just a practical issue of just what council will require. Like,
Yep, we'll take that on notice and we'll get a response. Thank you. Any other questions? So that's no planning authority today. Announcements by the Mayor. Just to mention that in the last week it was really great to go and see all those under 15 AFL young people here. There were some 700 plus, or there was about 500 players plus their families and friends that were here, and it was a great week, and I know a lot of the hotels around town enjoyed it, and some very competitive games, so that was fantastic for our city, for the under 15s from the AFL. It was also great to be involved with the launch of Multicap's new Community Access Centre, a fantastic new centre for our city and for those with for disadvantaged people, and a very open space, a fantastic space, and encourage people to have a look at that. And great to attend the opening night of We Will Rock You, and congratulations to our Deputy Mayor and to all at Encore really for the work with We Will Rock You. And if you haven't gone to see it, I trust you will. You got it this week, it finishes on Saturday night, so please get your chance to go and have a look. But also at the weekend it was a bit busy for our city when we had the Karate Federation of National Karate Championships here in our city, and it was great to go up there and be part of the official opening on Saturday, which is not in my notes, but you can put it in on the Saturday the 3rd. So it's a great event, and they held it here because of the event, and the Silver Dome was right for them, and they were all impressed with it except for the cool morning, so we couldn't do a lot about that at the time they were here, but the people really enjoyed it and got to look at a bit of our city as well. So thank you. Council reports. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to highlight two things. I want to follow up a point you made and also commend the Deputy on We Will Rock You. One of the things, other than the fact it was a wonderful show, that I think with something like that production, it's all the other people that give their time behind the scenes. So afterwards it was a great opportunity, and so I spoke to some people, as I'm sure many other councillors did, who were makeup artists or people that help with wigs and things like that. So it's not just what you see on the stage, and as I did say to the Deputy, the quality of the show equalled one that I saw in Melbourne. So it says a lot about our local talent and something we should all be very proud of. The other highlight for me, Mr Mayor, in the past, since our last meeting, I was fortunate to attend the second stage of the Headstone Project commemoration at Carvilla, and councillors from the previous council would remember Ms Andrea Gerard, who approached this council after having done a little bit of research. Andrea works at the university, about some graves she had found of returned servicemen from World War I, and at the time was after some assistance following on from a similar project that they ran in Cornelian Bay in Hobart. Andrea then came back to council with an even bigger good problem, where through the research they'd done, that actually, instead of a handful of those returned service unmarked graves, they'd found some almost heading up towards the 100. So in attending that, Mr Mayor, on last week, there was a couple of really great outcomes of that. The fact that there were families of people there of these former servicemen who had, at the time of their death, had returned from the war, and at the time of their death had been in perhaps bad financial or mental health situations, and had died and been buried in an unmarked grave, and those graves now had a headstone on them. That was possible through obviously the support of the council and the state and federal government, but it's also great to report that a number of work for the dole participants had assisted in that process, so they'd actually worked alongside a stonemason and got those skills. The other thing, Mr Mayor, in conclusion, the special guest speaker was a gentleman some of you may be familiar with, a man called Lambis Inglazos. Now, Lambis is a history teacher, and through his persistence, Lambis actually discovered a couple of hundred of missing Australian soldiers from World War I whose remains were found in Pheasant Wood in France. And it was only through his persistence in liaising with the government to convince them to undertake an excavation there that those long lost servicemen were found and buried in a grave with a headstone with their name on it. So a great experience, And Andrea did mention a couple of times, Mr Mayor, in her remarks, how grateful her and her organisation is to this council for their support. And there is another staged part of this process, I think, coming up in September with another 40 graves. So her and the team are doing a wonderful job. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councillor Soward. Any other council report? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things from myself. I'd like to start by acknowledging Paul Gimple, the Acting Director, as well as Nathan Williams, the Manager of Finance, who yesterday worked with a number of students from the Launceston Church Grammar School, sharing with them about budgeting, about financial responsibility, about rates and income and outgoings from a council perspective. The students from grade 6 were very engaged, and I know in speaking with the teachers during and after the session they were really appreciative, as are all schools when we open the doors here at Town Hall, but so appreciative of the skills and expertise of those two members of staff sharing with students, so I wanted to pass that on. The second point I wanted to highlight was some success in terms of attendance at our QV Mag. I want to start with Dinosaur Revolution, which is proving to be a great hit, and during the recent July school holidays, attendance numbers averaged almost 500 each day over the 16-day period, so proving to be a very successful exhibit indeed. Also wanted to note that some 9,050 people have passed through the planetarium over the last financial year, and this is an increase, a significant increase on the 2017-18 figures, and in fact the highest since 1994-1995. So some great things happening at the QV Mag, and no doubt more to continue.
Thank you. Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. I had two items that I did wish to mention. On the Wednesday the 31st of last month, I attended, as a councillor I suppose, a meeting of concerned people in regards to the swan culling that goes on down the Kanamaluka, Tamar River, not far from Launceston. It was organised by the landowner Frank Archer, who does conduct that culling. It also involved members, representatives from DPIPWI, the department responsible for issuing licences, and as well as community members and Ralph Cooper from BirdLife Australia. And without saying that we came to necessary solutions and conclusions, I just want to mention that it was fantastic to see the community come together and discuss the issue and to canvass possibilities and to share information. I made it clear that I attended as an individual rather than any representative of the council, but I just thought it's something that it's important for the council to maintain awareness over, as it is an ongoing issue. That there still are concerns about the fact that these birds near wetlands are being culled. It's an issue across Tasmania, and as I say, there's no easy solutions, but I wanted to commend the community for coming together in that way and seeking solutions. Also wanted to mention yesterday attending the public talk that Michael Mansell gave at the Town Hall, also attended by our Mayor and introduced by our Mayor, as well as Councillor Dawkins attending, and amongst other people, Lisa Poulton, who's the manager of the TAC, the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre in Launceston, Clyde Mansell, who's been a previous chair of the Aboriginal Land Council, Michael Mansell himself being the current chair of the Aboriginal Land Council, Dave Warner, who is the president of the TAC in Tasmania, and as well as Heather Sculthorpe, who came up from Hobart, who's the CEO of the TAC in Tasmania. Michael gave a talk on possible paths towards a treaty, whether it's on a state level or a federal level in Australia. It was a wide-ranging discussion. I appreciated the way that he left open the possibilities for further discussion and to find other ways to progress that idea, and he certainly impressed the importance of such discussions the Aboriginal community going forward. So that's all I have to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Council here on the 29th of this month, and we're going to be talking about homelessness. It was really interesting just to listen to the breadth of understanding the young people of Launceston have in relation to a topic which is so, I guess, topical at this point in time, unfortunately, particularly going through the depths of winter. So come along and listen to that youth council when they speak on the 29th.
Any other reports, sorry. Then we move on to question time. Questions without notice. Any questions from councillors? No? My microphone. 12.1, which is the Heritage Advisory Committee meeting, and we have got some speakers for this. So we have Glenda King. Oh, sorry, before you start, General Manager, if you could read out the rules. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. So only residents and ratepayers or those on the City of Launceston electoral roll may address an item on the agenda. Before speaking, please state your name and address or property owned in Launceston. You may speak for up to 2 minutes. No extension of time is permitted. You must speak for or against the recommendation, not ask questions of councillors or council officers, or attempt to enter into debate with councillors or council officers. Statements can only be made either directly relating to supporting the recommendations or arguing against it. Comments and statements are not to be defamatory, offensive or abusive, or be designed to embarrass any person, including councillors or council officers. Statements are not to be repetitive of statements or points already made. Several people speaking a common position should nominate a single speaker on their behalf. The Mayor may ask a member of the gallery to cease speaking if the above procedures are not followed. Following hearing the comments from the gallery, councillors will then consider the item.
Thank you. Glenda King, thank you.
Glenda King, 5 Scott Street. And Mr Mayor, I may seek your indulgence for another minute, as this is a fairly important matter.
You have 2 minutes, yes.
But I do have 2 to start, so could we start the clock now? I'm speaking for the motion of nomination. We have a situation before us, ironically, that the item in question, being potentially nominated for listing, is actually in part not the complete item. However, I still believe it should be listed. I think there is a solution that this council can find. The owner of the property has indicated publicly and has written publicly and is quoted publicly as saying that, and I quote, we were always going to reconstruct the same wall. The same wall runs for 33. The same wall ran for 33 running metres. It's double bricked. It's faced with pillars. There are existing photographs, drawings, etc. I would implore council that you seek that as a positive solution out of this, that the wall is rebuilt to its original specifications, and that you use all the legislative powers to enforce those conditions. And I think that is a satisfactory resolution for the parties for what has been a very divisive issue, and one that has certainly sparked a very high degree of community outrage. And I'm aware that as councillors you have all been contacted by members of your community, and you probably have been contacted on both sides, because there are 2 sides to every argument. So I would like to commend the Heritage Advisory Committee for their work on this matter, and I would also seek you to use your discretionary powers and decision-making powers to list the wall. Thank you.
Thank you. Umit Sungu? Sorry if I haven't pronounced that right.
Umit Sungu, this fence which is bulldozed on Tuesday morning, which is a relic of the 1867 Clockington original brick fence, and it is now maybe in the landfill area of the Launceston City Council. So we would like to, this remaining few bricks is there, and we would like to brick by brick rebuild that original fence. And it is a part of the history, part of the Launceston Mayor, Mr. John Scott, and MLC. He built up that place, and we would like to rebuild by the same bricks.
Thank you. Mark Melville.
Yes, Mark Melville. It's basically the same proposition. You have a heritage issue here. You can't let this swept aside because of an unfortunate accident. I mean, there's been questions asked about whether any evidence was presented to show that this was unsafe or there was any application for a permit or whatever. Basically, once these things are destroyed, reconstruction may not even be possible. So it's extremely important that Council put measures in place to ensure that these sort of events don't happen again and again. So basically, you don't need a pretext for destroying something that's just inconvenient. And this is an important part of Launceston's heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny Davidson.
I mean, I really can't add much more, except that it was a significant wall. We would really like it to be put on the heritage listing, so this sort of thing, it won't happen again. Like, there are parts of it still there. If we could list it and then rebuild it, like the developer said, she said in the newspaper she was very fond of it, was one of the reasons she actually bought the property. So we are expecting her to build it exactly like it was before. And in which case, if we heritage listed it, this sort of thing would never happen again. There'd be a bit of consultation before, anything was done again. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? That's all I have down here for that item. We have 12.1, Heritage Advisory Committee meeting. Moved, Councillor Walker. Seconded, Councillor McKenzie. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Walker?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor. The Heritage Advisory Committee meeting on the 4th of July was unfortunately, Councillor McKenzie couldn't attend that date, so I chaired that meeting. We welcomed Wendy Roberts as the new representative for the Launceston Historical Society, who replaces Sue McLaren, and I acknowledged that Sue's valuable contribution to the committee over the past 4 years. We also welcomed Ian Borsma as the representative for Heritage Tasmania. And at this point, I'd like to, point out that we appreciate all the contributions that we get around the table on the Heritage Advisory Committee. There's a wealth of experience and knowledge, specialised knowledge, that sit around that table, and I'm certainly, as a novice myself, in awe of some of that detailed knowledge. We certainly did discuss any significant development applications that involved heritage issues, and they are listed in the agenda. And then it was reported that the property at 14 to 16 St George's Square is not currently heritage listed. However, the front fence, which many people in the community consider to be of significance, was also not listed, and it was pointed out that over the elongated process of a development application being submitted back in July, and now a more recent development application being submitted that explicitly said that the red brick wall would not be removed, the Heritage Advisory Committee took it upon itself to discuss the merits of potentially listing the red brick wall in question. And as has been noted by one of our community speakers, it was a unanimous decision of the Heritage Advisory Committee, believing that the developer in question had taken note of the importance of that wall, that it might be appropriate that process be begun to formally recognise the significance of the wall. And I do have to say that the emphasis in the current DA that the red brick wall would not be removed and it was to be retained was an important factor, I think, for the Heritage Committee to proceed with that unanimous recommendation. It would appear that the inclusion in this week's agenda of the Heritage Advisory Committee's recommendation may have played some part in the preceding events. We're not to know that. And I expect now that the Heritage Advisory Committee will have to revisit the situation in light of subsequent events. We were also provided with an update on the redevelopment of Macquarie House by the Acting Director of Infrastructure Services, and I thank Matt Skirving for that. And that was, sort of universally received as something that, really positive that the Council has done, with the support from the federal government, and everyone's, very excited about that outcome. And I suppose that is all that can be sort of, gleaned from that meeting, because as it turned out, we were interrupted by a fire alarm about, 9/10 of the way through the meeting. So it was a rather hasty sort of conclusion to the meeting that we did experience, but we, luckily had got through most of those topics. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to acknowledge the comments made by Councillor Walker, and whilst I wasn't present at that meeting, I endorse the things that were actually said and agreed at that meeting. It's noted that we are an advisory committee. We're not a committee that makes decisions about heritage matters, but we provide advice back to the council in relation thereto. As a consequence of that, we do look at things that do have a heritage nature to them. Sometimes they're listed, sometimes they're not. And I guess in this case we were looking at an item that wasn't listed, but on the comments made by Councillor Walker, it seemed a reasonable thing for the committee to be doing. I just want to assure those people who are here today that all of the council are aware of what's happened, and if they're like me, they're dismayed in relation to what actually happened last week or earlier in the week. So I just wanted that to be said because it wasn't appropriate for any other comments to be made at this stage. But I just think that it probably highlights the importance of the Heritage Advisory Group, and coming out of this will probably be some other comments in relation to trying to strengthen up the resolve in relation to matters going forward in the heritage matters.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 12.2, Launceston Access Advisory Committee. Move Councillor Dawkins. To seconder, Councillor McKenzie. Councillor Dawkins, wish to speak to it?
Yes, please, Mayor. Thank you. As the chair of the Access Advisory Committee, I'd just like to point out we've got a lot of work to do. The 5 pillars that we committed to exploring as we advise council on how to move towards an access plan. If anybody has got any information they would like to share with us, either from a council perspective, officers, anyone listening today, we are looking for as many people to get involved with this as possible, because we're not doing very well in that space, unfortunately. There are 6.4% of Launcestonians, or people in our LGA, who identify as being disabled. And we need a policy to be able to include them as employees at council, but also in council events, in events that happen on council property. There's an enormous amount of work to be done. If we think about the mall redevelopment, for example, there were tactiles there that have not been replaced. So in some steps, we're actually going backwards. And we don't really understand why. The fantastic communications that come out of council don't always consider people. We should have captions on every single video that's made, and there's absolutely no reason why not. So we want everyone to be a part of this. This is about us all, whether we identify as having a disability or not. And we want to make sure that this work's done in a timely manner, so we're going to hold more meetings. We want as many people to come to those meetings as is possible. For example, tomorrow I'm attending a forum on disability in the arts. There's fantastic fantastic opportunities there to be able to really enrich the lives of some of our more vulnerable and disadvantaged community members. So look for work in this space, but please be involved.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie? No. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 13.1 was council workshops. Moved Councillor Finlay, seconded Councillor Soward. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Finlay? Councillor Soward? Any councillor wish to speak to it? 13.1. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 14.1, which is the notice of motion. There is some speakers for this one. So first of all, we have Stephen Saunders.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and councillors, for the opportunity to speak to this motion. Is that coming through okay? It's took about 2 minutes at home. It's a little different here. Thank you. So I'd like to ask the Lord Mayor and councillors, in considering the motion, that the council consider what has got us humans here to where we are today. For tens of thousands of years we roamed savannah and various other environments using our instinct and intuition. What has got us to our society today is science and technology and evidence. Yes, evidence-based rational thinking. I'm the secretary of the Launceston Skeptics, which is a science and evidence-based discussion group. This is a topic we've debated often. Science expands our sensory knowledge of the world beyond the limits of our senses, and we use science to give us evidence-based medicine. My life has personally been saved twice by medicine, and I'm sure there are other people in this chamber who have benefited. I'm sorry. What science now tells us is that we're facing an existential crisis. In July, in 1 month, sea levels rose 0.5 millimetre. This might not sound like a lot, but normally that sort of change takes decades. And you might doubt that science can measure that sort of measurement, but if you consider that gravity waves now used by astronomers actually measure changes in distance, the thickness of a human hair between here and the next nearest star, 4 light years away, 0.5 millimetre is not beyond the capabilities of science by any means. On the 1st of August, so that was in 1 month, July. In August, on the 1st of August, 10 billion tonnes of fresh water was released from the Greenland ice shelf. 10 billion tonnes, totally unprecedented.
Your time is up. Thank you. Your 2 minutes. Zoe Althusen.
Thank you, Mayor and Council members. Currently, countries all over the world are experiencing fires worse than have ever been recorded. Here in Tasmania, we recently experienced fires worse than have ever been recorded. The climate emergency we currently face is the most important and frightening crisis of our time, and indeed our lives. And it is on our lives that the Earth depends to deal with this. Tasmania is not exempt from this responsibility. Our giant kelp forests, one of only 2 in the world, are now more than 90% gone. We must act now. Your Sustainability Officer, Emma Williams, has made some excellent observations and recommendations, and I hope that you all listen to her words wisely. This Council's sustainability strategy contains some good goals and is a necessary first step in securing the safety of our future. That is, of course, if these goals are met within the intended time frame. I hope that as more councils across this country declare a climate emergency and put pressure on the federal government, we can begin to gain traction in this crisis and, as a nation, do our part to help build a future not just for our children, but for all life on this planet. May you vote based on the overwhelming evidence and with your conscience to pass this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. David Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I studied atmospheric physics at the University of Adelaide, I was taught the physics of how carbon dioxide traps heat in the Earth's atmosphere. I was told how measurements of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere had shown a steady increase, and how that increase was as a result of the burning of fossil fuels, coal, gas and oil. That was in 1974, I repeat, 1974, when the carbon dioxide concentration was around 330 parts per million. Last year it was 408 parts per million and was increasing faster, about 3 times faster than it had in 1974. Not only have we failed to stop adding carbon dioxide to our atmosphere, we can't even stop our additions from getting faster and faster. And we are starting to see the results of this. Weather patterns are breaking down, instability and extremes increase. We are seeing increased heat waves, droughts, storms, floods, sea level rise. And we are seeing vital natural systems such as coral reefs and kelp forests unable to cope with their changing environment. But why does this amount to an emergency? Because speed matters. Winning the battle against climate disruption slowly is the same as losing. Because there is an inertia to overcome, human inertia, resistance from people, institutions and corporations all need to be overcome. Because all the years of not having a climate emergency have failed. Emissions are still rising. Because we are still not even talking about the central problem, our addiction to coal, gas, petrol, diesel, jet fuel, let alone dealing with that addiction. Not treating our predicament as a climate emergency has clearly failed. We need to do something different. We need to treat this as an emergency. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenda King.
Thank you. I'm not going to speak from any scientific point of view. Rather, I'm speaking from an alternative point of view of what practical measures, apart from those that have been outlined in the agenda item you are discussing. Launceston is part of the 2020 project, which aims to increase the amount of urban green coverage by 20% by 2020. In the 2014 report, Where Are All the Trees?, Launceston did not get a very good rating. In fact, it was one of the lowest in Tasmania, as a rating of out of 5.1. And it also had an indication that it is exceptionally vulnerable to loss of green cover, and particularly through subdivisions and defoliation of, particularly on private land. Now, I am aware that Council has some innovative programs going under the 2020 program at Hobblers Bridge, Brisbane Court, Lamont House. But just walking around this city, walking in the reaches along the rivers, I can see that we can do a lot better. And we can use the passive energy of green growth and trees to help ameliorate the sorts of things that are being addressed in Councillor Dakin's motion. I think also that there is a sense of urgency, and the question of time was raised by the previous speaker. We don't have time to wait for the massive trees to grow. We need to retain what we have already. So therefore, I put to Council that we need to develop a strategy to encourage the retention on privately owned land, because you are doing what you can, as I would hope, on your public land that you have responsibility, to see trees and green cover and gardens as an asset and not as a liability, that developers embrace them and use them. And we don't see situations like what has happened with the subdivision of 14 St George's Square, where probably 80% of the vegetation has been stripped, where there are only basically 2 remnant large trees left. So thank you. I hope you can take those words into consideration.
Thank you, Mayor. There are those who argue that local council does not have a role in climate change leadership. You generally find these are the same people who argue that the federal government and the state government shouldn't take any role in climate change leadership. The arguments are usually based on science denial, and they should be ignored.
All levels of government have a role, but unfortunately successive federal governments have failed dismally on this most important of issues, and history will not be particularly kind to them, especially over the last 20 to 25 years. On the other hand, if you're a pragmatic federal government, you probably wouldn't take serious action unless you could be convinced that there's broad grassroots support for it. So it's in this context that local government absolutely has to take the lead. Declaring a climate emergency is symbolically important, but it must lead to change, otherwise it's meaningless. The types of actions that follow must aim to future-proof the city and surrounding productive land against increased climate variability. They must make space for the preservation of landscape-scale biodiversity. From a business perspective, climate disruption will be massively costly at a global level, and that will impact here, but for many there will also be new opportunities. Overall, the long-term competitiveness of our city will be enhanced through understanding and adapting to a changing climate. Actions that aim to mitigate climate change also often have positive influence on livability and health. So I urge you all to support the motion. It would be a wonderful endorsement of the future-focused nature of our city and the leadership capacity of our council if it was a unanimous vote.
Thank you. That's all the speakers I have. Anyone else that hasn't put their name down? No. Thank you. So Councillor Dakin is moving the motion and seconded Councillor Dawkins. You wish to speak, Councillor Dakin?
Sure. I do, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to acknowledge and thank the speakers before the motion, speaking to the motion. I really do appreciate that, and I appreciate some of your guidance too during formulating this motion. I'm going to speak a little bit differently to why I bring this motion to Council. It's really simple for me. If we don't, we are the problem. Now, we might only contribute a very small percentage to that problem, but if we don't help fix our share, then what hope have we got trying to help others? What hope does the climate have? This motion, put simply, is about acknowledgement, awareness, and ultimately action. And most importantly, it's about our future. And like many others, my future starts at home with my young family. Generations before us did not know what we know now. Look back at what they used to do, like my parents, their parents, burning rubbish in the backyard in the incinerator. Large landfill. They used to burn tyres. Unawareness of the harm of our industrial pollution. No recycling at all. The list goes on and on. I'm not going to stand here and give you all a lecture on the history of climate change, as it would take far too long and I would not do it justice. David Hamilton has done a far better job in doing that. I do believe, though, everyone here in the chamber recognises that our climate is changing at a rapid rate, and we're all collectively responsible for that. For years, I myself did not pay any attention to climate change. Why would I? I was enjoying life, only focused on the now, not the future. Couldn't see climate change, therefore it didn't exist. It wasn't affecting my life, so why worry about it? One could say I was turning into the typical middle-aged white male conservative. But that abruptly changed. I can still clearly remember when. I was sitting on the back step of our house, the one that's still standing. Climate change got the other one. And I had an inquisitive conversation with my son around recycling, pollution and the climate. I asked him where he'd learnt most about this, and the little bugger surprised me. He turned around and said he'd watched a doco on Netflix. And then he asked me why we aren't driving an electric car, Dad. It gets better. My son refers to me being a councillor as the boss of the city, although I constantly remind him that that's the mayor. Then he asked, what are you doing to help the climate, Dad? Now, Lennox is only 8. He might not have known exactly what he was asking, but I did. And I didn't exactly know all the answers. This is what the next generation not only demands, but also absolutely deserves. Excuse me. It deserves to be able to grow up in a healthy climate, and by declaring a climate emergency, we're one step closer to achieving this for them. And if you also look around, it's what the older generation wants to ensure happens for them. So what can the Launceston City Council do? And what is the Launceston City Council currently doing? Because the broader public might not know all the great things that the council is currently doing. As this motion sets out, it is to acknowledge that climate change requires immediate reaction by declaring a climate emergency. We create awareness by expressing our position to the state and federal governments. We draw a line in the sand so we can obtain a starting point for our greenhouse emissions, so we can start measuring them and formulating a plan to address them. We set targets, 6 years, to achieve 100% renewable energy, and we're very close to achieving that now. 100% neutrality of carbon emissions. What does this mean? Looking at changing fleets, carbon offsets, reducing the amount of fossil fuels we use as a council. This is how we can lower greenhouse emissions, switch to renewable energy sources, which is the key to a sustainable future. If we can achieve these targets as a local council, we can truly lead by example by showing other councils it's achievable. What are we currently doing? The great things with our landfill and capturing methane gas. Our FOGO, LED lighting, solar panels. We've also got a sustainability officer in Emma Williams, and I believe that's one of the first positions in the state for this council. We've got electric car charging points in our Patterson Street car park, and I believe there's provision in the new car park at CH Smith building. We're also looking in the future at changing some of the fleet across to electric cars. We are the largest council in the state. We are a truly independent, strong council that does not lean towards one political party or the other like some councils do in the south. This is why our climate motion will send a strong message to the state and federal government.
Thank you, Councillor Dakin. Your time is up. You want an extension? You move, Councillor Soward, second Councillor Finlay. All those in favour? Thank you. You have an extension.
Thank you. As I said before, the position of this council, we can deliver a strong message. Make it impossible for the state and federal government to ignore. Stop them playing politics with our climate and start becoming part of the solution. 30, 40, 50 years ago, changing climate was urgent. Today it's an emergency. We are closer than ever to the tipping point of irreversible damage, and urgent action is actually too late. The time to be conservative has well and truly passed. The time to act is now. The sheer scale of what we're facing requires an emergency response to turn the climate around. This begins with us locally and every other local community, and only then we may have a chance to find a global solution. The word emergency may not sit well with some, and I understand this, but if we don't call it an emergency, there will be no action. The question is, who are we going to hurt by declaring a climate emergency? The question should be, who are we hurting if we don't?
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to congratulate Councillor Daking on bringing this motion to Council. As an influential business leader, Councillor Daking is staking a claim as having a broad contemporary view on his role as an elected representative, bringing an issue which, whilst not core council business, affects every single member of our community, especially those of us with an interest in how the next 100 years will pan out due to climate change. I acknowledge the new role of Emma Williams, our Sustainability Officer, and look forward to a strategy which sets out our positive contributions to climate change mitigation and emissions reduction, but also documents our deficits, for we are, like any post-industrialised community, contributing more harm than good by our current everyday habits. The United Nations gives us just 12 years to avoid catastrophe. This is not a statement made lightly, but made with the awareness that current systems which underpin the climate emergency must change in order for the future inhabitants of Earth to have any chance of any semblance of the lives which we've lived. The neoliberal attitude has been to deregulate environmental standards and push the responsibility onto individuals. That responsibility has been taken up enthusiastically by many of us. Eat less meat, travel less, walk more, buy second-hand, reduce pollution. All of this giving us the sense that we can make a difference, tying ourselves up in knots in an attempt to make a positive impact on the world, all the while increasing emissions on a national scale, with government after government failing to introduce any kind of energy policy which will give certainty in a post-fossil fuel era. July 2019 was the world's hottest month ever. I fear we will continue to read such headlines for many, many more months to come. Climate change is affecting the whole planet in some way, from the Greenland ice melt, Arctic fires, extinction emergency, ocean acidification, rising sea levels, drought, fire and flood. The last two effects we in Tasmania only know too well. Fire and flood have a relative effect, with every fire affecting the propensity for flood in the recovery years as the earth hardens in response to fire, making water flow only more severe. Climatologist with the Bureau of Meteorology, Ian Barnes-Keegan, has reported as attributing a degree in temperature rise to climate change in the past century. More extreme heat, less very cold days. Rainfall is reducing, but rain events are becoming heavier, with more damage to people and property. Sea levels are rising at 3 millimetres a year, which doesn't sound so bad, but as oceanographer John Hunter points out, 10 centimetre rise increases the chance of flood by 3 times. Coastal erosion is an enormous issue as warming oceans expand to absorb carbon dioxide. As Glenda has touched on, the recent 2020 Vision survey on heat stress in Australian suburbs named Launceston as the most vulnerable LGA in Tasmania. For anyone who's been to Mayfield on a hot day knows this to be true. Lack of street trees has contributed to the intensity of heat, with the 2012 street tragedy not yet having a measurable impact on mitigating the effects of heat stress due to climate change in some of our most vulnerable communities. There is an opportunity to ramp up tree planting to address this public health issue. Lyons, right on our doorstep, has suffered from decades of land clearing, putting it in the top 12 electorates nationally with unprecedented loss of habitat for native species. Some forget Australia has the highest rate of animal extinction globally. Land clearing destroys habitat and contributes to heating environment through the inability to capture carbon. With the support of this motion today, we become part of a group of contemporary Australian councils who are saying that state and federal governments have become hamstrung to act, leaving the door open for councils to become leaders in this debate. We owe it to our community, to future communities and to ourselves to put ourselves on the name of the list of 28 Australian councils so far who have signed up to doing more on climate change, with the federal minister using the same old boring argument that councils should stick to rubbish removal. Well, we manage that. Not only do we remove waste, but we provide every opportunity for our community to recycle, compost and reuse, as well as educating the wider community on waste reduction, repurposing and reprocessing within a circular economy model. We are leaders in moving towards zero waste. Now we can also be leaders in look towards zero emissions, something that would continue to instil pride and hope in our community. I support this motion today with their special consideration to those young climate-aware community members. They need to see action from us now to give them the tools and the capacity to live through a time of rapidly changing environmental conditions. With climate despair or solastalgia, a term coined and now widely used to express the sense of existential distress caused by our heating world, increasing with it the emotional and physical pain that anxiety brings. With 1 in 2 Australians reporting to their doctors with mental ill health, it's up to us as leaders to ensure we are doing everything we can to prepare and prevent our communities from worse distress. Yes, please, just a bit more. Thank you. For those who say our contribution is so small that taking any action would be pointless, I say we are all in this together. Allies have banded together to protect and prosecute a common aim in the past, and climate change is no different, except that this time the common task helps us all. We have lived through the transition from warnings on a heating climate to the reality of what that means. For those of us who had followed this debate for many years and could feel it coming and see it coming, the changes are unprecedented. With animals failing to adapt to climate change, we are already accepting that millions of species will become extinct due to human activity causing rising temperatures. The planet is losing its colour and its ability to home, Earth's inhabitants. And you know, for this, I cannot quiet my voice.
Thank you. Councillor Stojanczyk.
I stand today to offer my enthusiastic and complete support for the motion Councillor Daking has brought before us, and I want to congratulate and thank him for his initiative and commitment to seeking action on climate change. I initially asked my son if he had anything he wanted me to say on his behalf, as we're actually debating the fate of his future today. He said, "Why would anyone listen to one boy? What difference can one person make?" After getting over the initial shock of his statement, which was in direct contrast to everything we've brought him up to believe, I explained that it's actually the very thing that will make a difference on this issue. Even though we're seeing some great initiatives happening around the world, sadly we've seen virtually no leadership on this issue at a federal level in Australia. We're not going to get the changes we need in the necessary timeframes if we wait for a top-down leadership. We need to lead from the ground up. Each person needs to demand change. Every individual, every community, every council that stands up will make a difference. Councils are more directly connected to the people than other levels of government, and the people are telling us they want us to act. I'm sure that I don't need to convince anyone in this room that climate change is real and is happening right now. Every article that's published suggests that the climate is changing much more quickly than we'd anticipated. A recent article in Forbes quotes a Harvard professor who suggests we only have 5 years left to act. Some suggest less time. Unusual weather patterns and its effect on food production, extreme weather events, floods, bushfire, strong winds. We're going to see some catastrophic changes in our economic, societal and political structures in our lifetime. So what can we do as a council? Firstly, we can join the worldwide movement with other governments from around the globe and add our voice to the message that we're in the midst of a climate emergency. Secondly, we can lobby the state and federal governments to encourage them to take action also. Thirdly, we can complete our sustainability strategy and develop a climate change action plan which details ways that we can not only respond to and protect against the effects of a changing climate, but also ways in which we can mitigate our impact on the earth. These documents need to sit at the forefront of our organisation. They need to provide a lens through which we view all decisions made by Council. Why not find out what's best practice from around the world and implement these initiatives here? As a parent of young children, I lie awake at night wondering what sort of world my children are going to inherit. Recently, Barack Obama said, "I'm fond of quoting the words of Martin Luther King, who believed that there is such a thing as being too late. When it comes to climate change, the hour is almost upon us. If we act boldly and swiftly, if we set aside our political interests in the favour of the air that our young people will breathe, and the food they will eat and the water they will drink, if we think about them and their hopes and dreams, then we will act. And it won't be too late. And we can leave behind a world that is worthy of our children, where there's reduced conflict and greater cooperation, a world marked not by human suffering but by human progress." So I implore my fellow councillors to support this motion today as a message to our leaders that the people want action and as a vital step for our council to acknowledge the importance and urgency of the issues we face from a changing climate and the impacts it will have on our community.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And I'll probably start where Councillor Daking left off. Who do we hurt if we do? And more importantly, who do we hurt if we don't? And I think, just paraphrasing his comments, makes it very easy for me to vote in favour of this motion today. I've had conversations with Councillor Daking and others about emergency and urgency, and I probably prefer the word urgency, but that's just me as to the way I look at things. I probably come from a background of climate scepticism. I have a father who was a farmer who had said, look, 40 years ago we had rain events and we had droughts, and we're still having them today. We've had ice ages, we've had all sorts of events that happened in the world over many years. Again, I look at things and I keep looking at all the things that I do and things that trouble me, and it's interesting, it was prophetic today that we had plastic-free Launceston here speaking this afternoon. And I consciously look at plastics, and I've travelled all around the world, and I've been to India, and where it's absolutely dreadful. And I walk around Launceston, whilst it's not dreadful, it's still pretty bad. You don't have to look very far to see, the elements of the plastics, which are petrochemicals, which come out of the ground, and I guess all add to the climate change issues that have been spoken about already. So I want to acknowledge and thank Councillor Daking and others I know who have been in the background in relation to this motion coming today. So we don't change the law, but we can change our world, and we can influence others by the actions that we take. So I'm very happy to stand here and support the motion. I'm really thrilled with the work that we're already doing in Council. But again, let's not lose the impetus of what today's motion is actually going to bring us. I'm very confident that this motion will get passed by Council today, and I hope unanimously, to show that we are serious about this, and by writing to our federal members. And we've had debates about other issues in and around this chamber about what's Council responsibility and what's not, and I take Mr Pitt's comments of earlier about saying, what if we don't do something about it? I don't know, everything is in our responsibility. We have a chance to say what we feel. We are community leaders, we are community influencers in what we do. So us making a stand on something can't be just swept under the table. They can ignore us, but we cannot not be heard. So I fully endorse the motion that's been put forward to us today, and thank Councillor Daking for bringing it to us.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor, and like others before me, I also commend Councillor Daking on bringing this to us today. I want to start by touching on the words emergency and urgency, because in some feedback that I've had from people, there was a little bit of nervousness, a concern, if you like, around the use of those words. And when I jumped onto the Oxford Dictionary website, it said that urgency was a noun which meant an importance requiring swift action. And ironically, Mr Mayor, the example it used, the discovery of the ozone hole gave urgency to the issue of CFCs. So that's the example used on the dictionary website. Some of the synonyms for urgency were importance, top priority, gravity, necessity, seriousness. So again, to those people who perhaps had some concerns and said, oh, look, it's not an emergency, it's important, but whatever, I say to them, as I used to say as a teacher, have a look in the dictionary and see what's there. For anyone who's also perhaps out there wondering about emergency and urgency, you only have to reflect on Mr Hamilton's remarks, where he said in 1974, there were already concerns out there. 1974, when Zoe wouldn't have been born. 1974, the second year of the Richmond back-to-back premiership. I was 6 years old. So what we're saying is that when we dig into emergency and urgency, this is exactly what this is. Mr Mayor, I'd also, just in finishing up that line of conversation, those words that again concern some people have different contexts, and again, when you dig into the dictionary, it says that. So if you're walking up the street and someone falls over and hurts themselves, you might need to act urgently to help them up. But there's other sorts of urgency, like a flood event, that might take some days to get here. So urgency can mean a lot of different things. And given the fact that it's been known for a long time, it obviously hasn't been urgent in too many people's minds until today. One of the things I love about Councillor Daking's motion is that he spelled out very, very clearly in that motion, what he wants from today. And one of the things I like, for instance, about point 1 in his motion, he talks about acknowledging the urgency, but all tiers of government working together. Now, I've stood up in this chamber before, as have others, talking across a number of issues where local, state and federal government work together, the city deal being one most recently, where great things happen. Where great things happen when 3 tiers of government work together. So, to me, this is what has to happen here. Politics needs to go out the window. People don't need to play politics with this, and sadly, I think it's been something that's been kicked around for a long time. This type of thing where local government, the tier of government closest to the people, is saying it's important, we need to lead the way there. I like in point 3 gathering that baseline data, which is really, really important. I'm not a scientist and don't pretend to be. I guess for me, one of the things that that drives my beliefs on this, Mr. Mayor, is the simple question. Again, it's not a scientific one, but the simple question: are our actions making the climate better? Simple as that for me, and the answer is no. So if they're not, we need to do stuff that does make it better. I also have had people say to me, a bit like Councillor Mackenzie, I grew up in the country and remember with much glee at the time lighting fires with stacks of tyres, as you did back when you were a young person. You know, those things went on. It was just how things were. But we've learnt from those things, we've learnt from those times, and I say to those people, you know, we know now that there are significant changes. Councillor Dawkins very articulately spelled out different weather events. I think she mentioned Ian Barnes-Keegan from the Bureau of Meteorology. Significant. Everything seems to be extreme, you know, where it's either real hot, real cold, lots of rain in a short time, etc. So, to me, our actions aren't making the climate better. I think Councillor Daking's notice of motion, Mr Mayor, also highlights that Council is punching above its weight. We are being the change we want to see. We're not standing up here around the table signalling virtue to the community saying, you have to do this, and then we're doing the opposite. We're not doing that. We've got the LED lighting, which is in the notice of motion, the way we're using solar power, the cogen technology, and the green waste bins. All of those positive things that we're doing to make a difference, which I think is terrific. Mr Hamilton, in his remarks, Mr Mayor, highlighted a number of very high-level scientific aspects of change, and I think that they're really, really important to note. Promoted me. Thank you.
Moved Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Finlay. All those in favour? That's carried. Sorry.
Thank you. And just in sort of finishing up, I think that it's really, really important, and I've said this on a number of other things that have come to the Council, and I guess it's something that really is important to me. This climate emergency issue, or any issue that comes to this table, it's not up to the 12 people around this table or the wonderful officers we have or the fantastic people that come in and speak passionately about it to fix it. We can't do that. But what each of us need to do as members of our community, we can all do something that helps fix the problem. And there's an old saying, if it has to be, it's up to me. If we just sit back and as a council we go, it's not our lookout, state government, federal government, someone else will fix it, never gets fixed, never gets done. Because the thing that we forget, Mr Mayor, sometimes is that whether it's local government, state government, federal government or any organisation, it's comprised of individuals. It's comprised of people. And together, collectively, Councillor Stodgenseck touched on it with her young son, the actions of each of us help add up to that whole. So if each individual does their bit, uses the green waste bins, the LED lighting, whatever, we all contribute to that whole. It's very important, as the largest council in the state, that we do make this point today. We make it very clear. We do lobby our state and federal representatives so they understand how important we think it is, and we need to keep having that collective loud voice around that particular topic. Because if we just sit here and we go, oh no, well it's not really that important, someone else will fix it, the generations ahead of us will look back on this generation, I'm sure, with disgust, with disappointment, with sorrow, on why people here in our position of power didn't do anything to fix it. So I'm very proud to support the motion, and my magic wand in finishing up, I'd love state and federal government to sit with councils and go, not finger point, not say that's wrong, that's right, but work together and say we've got a problem, let's fix it. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm not going to repeat lots of the great things that have been said. I want to start, though, by acknowledging the breadth and diversity of the great comments that have been provided to me via written form and via conversations in the lead-up, not only to today, but certainly in recent months, where the importance of this topic and the relevance of this topic has been further related to me with regard to our Launceston community. For me, I'm not getting hung up on the word emergency, and I know for some of you around the table that could be an issue. What I've decided to do is to look at this important matter in the context of we are already doing some amazing work. And what this motion asks us to do is to be aspirational in what we can do further in enhancing the community that we live in, the community that we lead, and the community that we will leave for generations to follow. The inaugural sustainability strategy that this council was and is preparing is going to be a leading document in terms of our ability to influence and to change. And there are so many initiatives, and you've heard many of them. I'm not going to go through the detail, but the mapping, the FOGO bins, the electric vehicle charging, the methane gas, electricity generation through the landfill, energy efficiency, the list goes on and on in terms of what we are doing. For me today, I'll be supporting the motion because I think it sets out some aspirational targets of what we can do better in terms of our contribution to what is a big problem. We're already doing so many great things, and we can continue to show a leadership role in what we do into the future here through the City of Launceston.
Thank you, Deputy. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And I too rise to support this motion, and I commend Councillor Daking on bringing this forward. As I walked into the room today, as we did see the silent protesters bearing witness in our foyer, I did see one sign saying "Tell the truth," and it caught my eye. And you think, well, why is that? We all think we do tell the truth, and we all endeavour to tell the truth, but truth can be a relative thing, I suppose. And what we have is science, as we've been well reminded by some of the speakers, both at the table and from the community. Science is the only thing that we can put our trust in when it comes to telling the truth. We'd all like to think that we are doing the right thing by the environment, but, I would hazard a guess and say that no one in this room is carbon neutral. We're just not. We all have a long way to go. We know that we do. We know that this is the beginning of a long journey for our community, for our state, for our country, and for the world. And if we can contribute our part to that, then well and good, and I'm in full support of that. All around this table, people want to do the right thing. In the community, people want to do the right thing. And that does involve referring to the experts, to the scientists. To maybe mix metaphors, I put my faith in science. People, we all care for the future. We want to, have good intent in our community. And in this instance, it definitely involves putting our faith in science. So this is a beginning. We're not the first council to do this. We won't be the last council to do this. Progress with prudence. Here we go. We are in the middle of the field, and we start from a good base, as has been pointed out around the table. But let's strive. Let's aspire to be the best in that process. Humans can be short-sighted. We're flawed. We can be selfish. We can be greedy. But we also have a big brain, and some of us can put that big brain to good use. And now's the time for us to listen to those people who have far more expertise than ourselves, who undoubtedly, almost unanimously agree that climate change is affecting the earth. And it is a climate emergency. I have no issue whatsoever with that word emergency. So we get our house in order. But I'd love to see that this is just the beginning. I'd like to think that our council and our state government can go further when it comes to planning laws, planning decisions, development applications, that we can apply the same sustainability audits that we will be applying to ourselves on the community. But we have to do it to ourselves first. As one of the speakers said, I think Councillor Soward, that there's no point us pointing the finger and saying, well, you should do this and you should that. We need to do it first. So, in conclusion, I think we're going to, face more and more of these issues over time. I'm very proud to be associated with a council who's taking that first step of many. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, my fellow councillors. I came here to this meeting with an open mind, ready to be listened to both sides of the argument, and it's all been a bit one way, which is interesting. But as I expressed to Nick when we talked about this motion, or the possibility of him bringing this motion, I had a problem with the word emergency. I then went to the dictionary. I didn't go to the Oxford Dictionary. I did go to another one, and it came back and told me it could be a crisis. I actually like the word crisis as a preference to emergency, because unfortunately the climate emergency has been politicised. However, this is really a bigger thing than politics, and it does require all of us of any colour, that you may be red, green or blue, sitting around this table, or in fact sitting around any legislative chamber in the country. We need to go beyond that and actually say this is something we have to do, as Nick said, for his children and their children's children, because if we don't do it now, playing with semantics about a word is just going to be too late. We'll be the ones who'll be blamed. So I will in fact support the motion today. It is, as many people have said, and I won't repeat what lots of people have already said, we are a small part. We're 13% of Tasmania, which is 2.5% of the world, which is about 0.4 of 1% of the total population in the world. So what we do is pretty small. However, if we can't get our own house in order, then that means that we can't expect others to do the same. I think the single most important part of Nick's motion is, in fact, to lobby those in the state and federal governments to then lobby other countries who contribute far more to this problem is the most important part of that, because that is where the biggest difference will be made. But individually, for those of you who think we don't make a difference, I read a very good quote, and I'll finish on that, and that is that individually we are but a drop of water, but together we are an ocean and we have power. So I will leave you to think about that and say thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Very deep and meaningful, Mayor. I don't know that I can top that. Look, firstly, congratulations to Councillor Dakin for bringing this forward. I know he's looking at me wondering what I was going to do. I completely support it. And for everybody that's spoken today, I've got no intention of repeating what's been said. Made me think about a couple of things, though. Different speakers have talked about opportunity. They've talked about making people aware. They've talked about we're able to drop in the ocean. We are a very small player in all this. And we are. How do we get attention? How do we do it? And I got thinking about that, and I thought, we're one of 29 councils, probably 20 more than there should be, some people may say. And I thought, how can we make that and turn that into an opportunity? I got thinking about all the things that have been said and all the things that this council does, and we do great things, and we are continuing to do great things, and we will continue to do great things. And I thought, well, if you could bring the other 29 or 28 councils together, what benefit could you get from doing that? So I'm going down the path of where you were heading and trying to take it a step further. Well, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if we got 29 councils together with a massive buying power to all purchase electric vehicles? Wouldn't that be an interesting thing? I thought, how do we do that? Well, I thought, well, Councillor Dakin's pretty smart. He could probably put together a forum. I thought he might put together a forum, bring the other 28 councils in, we could sit them around the table, he could chair it, and we could embarrass them, shame them, talk them into it, ask them for help. And do you know what? I will bet you, whatever I've got, that by the end of the day, if those 28 councils come on board, there'd be 29 councils with a massive buying power that would start off a trend that would be talked about around this country, where we have got not necessarily trucks, not necessarily other things, but the smaller vehicles, the electric cars. And I'll bet you the state government would sit up and go, wow, that wasn't a bad idea, because that's where the leadership needs to start. They're the ones that want to get rid of the fleet they've got. They're the ones that want to change the vehicles that they've got. So I don't mean to specifically stick onto the vehicle thing, but everyone else has talked about all the other stuff. I'm just wondering how we can take it to the next level, how we can get attention. And sometimes you've just got to do something outside the circle to get the attention. So I support your motion. I've given you a thought to maybe chair a forum and get a little bit more kudos.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Finlay.
Thanks, Mayor. It's always great to hear the contributions of everyone around the table, and I've given this item a lot of consideration, not only in the weeks progressing towards this meeting as we were aware the motion was coming, but also obviously over recent months and years, as it has been a large conversation within the community. And although it might appear to be a lone voice at the table here, I know that it's a voice that's shared with many in the community, that my response to this motion comes on two quite distinct layers. And the first is around the language. I know there's people at the table that have raised that the concern of language isn't necessarily important. But no matter how many times I cut the conversations around this issue or discuss it with a various number of people in the community of various generations, personally I remain to hold an internal tension around the word emergency. I don't often operate at the periphery of political discussion, and I'm not a denier. The climate is absolutely changing and having an impact. But I'm not yet at the point where I'm both free of tension or certain that it is an emergency. I understand the benefit of claiming an emergency and therefore the promotion that comes with that and the energy that can follow. But whether it be tell the truth or whether it be openly and genuinely lead as we do in our community, I think it's important to share that internal feeling because I know that it is one that's held by others. Having said that, my second layer of response to the motion is one that is shared by everyone at the table, that the City of Launceston in so many ways, and not just on this issue, is a leader. We're a leader not only locally in the state of Tasmania, but we lead on many elements nationally and globally in some areas. I'm really committed to the work that we're doing and the continued work that we do to ensure that we provide responsibly to our community for the best opportunity for their own health and wellbeing, and that aligns with many of the existing and future intentions within our sustainability strategy. So I support all of the intentions and the outcomes and the current actions of the city. I absolutely have conviction to support that we ensure we provide for the best health and wellbeing of our community. But it's important to me to share, although it is potentially the lone voice at the table, that, like many in the community, sometimes the escalation of language can be helpful, can be not, but I've given a lot of consideration and I have to share that the word emergency isn't something that necessarily sits comfortably with me.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy, if you can have the chair for a minute. I wasn't going to speak, but I will. Since everybody else has, so I thought, well, it basically has all been said. I'm not going to repeat that. I came into the chamber too thinking, is it emergency, isn't it? And I think I was focusing on that word because words are important, there's no doubt about it. They have an impact on people that you speak with and you talk to. I agree with everything as far as the concept of climate change. It's definitely changing. I've got nothing against disagreement with any of that. And it's a very complex issue for me, and I'm like some here, I'm definitely not a scientist, and I have listened to different scientists, and some who actually disagree that it is a serious issue. So there are contra views on that as well. But I've probably come to the conclusion, sitting here, that I'm more than happy to support the motion because, same as what I did with the Australia Day one, when I had disagreement on some of the facts in there, and I know some of my supporters who support me wouldn't agree with me supporting this motion. I quite agree, as they didn't back then. But I'm more than happy to say I probably understood a little bit more what people are talking about with the emergency. And what I would like it not stressed as an emergency as such, I believe it's an extremely important action. I like your word urgent. I think urgent sits in very well with me. That's the right word to be using for this debate. It is urgent action and we do need to take action now. And I like the way that even Councillor Dakin, I think, said it's immediate action. And they're the sort of words that I'd like to see, immediate action, taking action, doing something, time to act is now, rather than concentrating on the emergency. But to me, I'm not going to die in a ditch over one word in the whole motion, because I believe it's important that we, as a council, do make a stand and that we do also know that what we're doing, I support everything that's been said about what we are doing. But having even said that, I do go back to somewhere in my youth, and that was a long time ago. I had people coming to me saying the world is going to end in 10 years, 20 years. Still going along fine to me, and I love this place we live in. I think it's an absolutely beautiful city. We've got a great island in Tasmania. While the climate is changing, it's still lovely to live here, and I think it's fantastic. I want the kids to understand that as well, that there is a positive place to be. Yes, we need to act, and we need to make sure that we can prolong it as long as we can. But the other thing that I want to disagree with, one, just while I'm here with Councillor Walker, he said he was going to put his faith in scientists. I put my faith in a great God, and I'll always continue to do that and listen to the scientists for their advice, but trust God in what he is doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Back to you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer.
I'm the last one, but honestly, I'm going to support it. We are fairly lucky to be in Tasmania. We've got hydro energy, non-polluting. We haven't got much gas, coal or oil. We are going to be a long time before we can get rid of tractors and trucks away from diesel. I think we can fix this by putting a heap of trees in and promote Tasmania, the cleanest city in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Dakin, you wish to close?
I do, thank you, Matt. First of all, thank you to my fellow councillors for all speaking and having a great discussion. I won't say debate, but it's been very humbling, and I'm very proud of you all for adding to this extremely important item, climate, I should say. I'd also like to thank our council officers, and I'd like to thank the General Manager for assisting me in drafting up this motion. So thank you, GM, and thank you to Emma. I'm not sure if Emma's here. Up the back. Thank you, Emma. You're doing a fantastic job. I'm really glad that this debate didn't come to the one word that I'm not going to mention, because I think we can all pass and move past that word, because it's just a word, and we can move on from that. I think in years and years to come, we won't even be thinking what we're discussing. Let's be the 32nd council in Australia. Let's be the 32nd council in Australia to declare a climate emergency. Let's not be the 537th council in Australia to declare emergency, because we'd be showing no leadership at all. Climate change investment, from my business point of view, is actually one of the largest growing emerging sectors in the world. So what does that tell you? I won't go on about business, but I'd just like in closing to say thank you very much. I believe we've got support around the table, and unanimous support would be fantastic to send a very strong message to the state government and then on to the federal government. And Councillor Cox has just given me a fantastic idea. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that's all unanimous. That is carried. Thank you. We move on. Item number 15.1, Council Committee hearing. Move Councillor McKenzie. Is there a seconder? Councillor Finlay. Wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie? Yes.
I will briefly, Mayor. I think it's well set out in the recommendation that we're recommending that the covenant isn't lifted. The logic behind it, as we listen to both the proponents for the lifting of the covenant and those asking for it not to be lifted. And we came to the determination that the DA met all the planning requirements which we'd previously voted on. We noted that the DA was for 2 houses, and we also noted that we believe that the developer could probably achieve that development without necessarily lifting the covenant by seeking another alternative, which we believe didn't therefore require us to lift the covenant on this occasion.
Thank you. Second to Councillor Finlay, wish to speak? Any councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 16.1, release. Move, Deputy Mayor. Second to Councillor McKenzie. Wish to speak to it, Deputy?
Well, other than to use the word exciting and not before time. So great confidence in the operator that is listed there, and let's make it happen.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
I'm just about to speak. I was just preparing myself. I would agree.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Can I put the motion? Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 17.1, lease of the Princess Theatre. Move Councillor McKenzie. Is there a seconder? Councillor Soward. Wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
I do, Mayor. And look, I'm very pleased to support this as your council representative on the Theatre North Board. I think they've done a wonderful job in managing the theatre over many years, and certainly would like to support it. I guess my only concern is that I'm talking about it today, considering I thought that 2017 this matter was already dealt with. But I'll be happy to see this go through the process it needs to go through and come back for endorsement at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Councillor Soward. Any other councillor wish to speak? Deputy Mayor.
Just a question. On page 33, just in terms of clarity, it says Theatre North Inc provides a public benefit by offering its facilities for the use of various community groups and members of the public. I think one must make clear that that certainly doesn't happen for free, and it certainly doesn't happen at a significantly discounted rate. Could that be reflected in future reporting so that one doesn't come to think that users don't pay high fees to use the facility?
Thank you. Noted, no doubt. Yep. Thank you. Any other speakers, questions? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.1, annual remission of rates. Moved, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded, Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Just to note the impact of the concessions that we actually do give, and I just make people aware.
Thank you. Councillor Soward. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 20.1, delegation from council to the General Manager. Moved, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded, Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie? Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 20.2, amendment to the minutes of the previous council meeting on the 27th of June. Moved, Councillor Finlay. Seconded, Councillor Soward. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Finlay? Councillor Soward? Any councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. And that is the closure of the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.